Good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
There, it's working now.
All right. I'm not the comedian, so even though I occasionally tell a few dad jokes. Well, first of all, welcome to Norwood Manor. So glad that you can make it out this evening. In case you didn't know, there was some refreshments right outside the door here, so feel free. We got some brownies and some water. And if you do need to step out for a few moments, you can obviously step out this way or back around this way. Bathrooms are down towards the end of this hallway here, across from the mailboxes as well. So, all right. I want to let you know that after Jack does his show tonight, for all our guests, we do have some gifts for you. So make sure you see Tellus or me or somebody. Yep, I'm back here, and we have something for you for our guests when they leave this evening. Okay. All right. We all ready for this? Yeah. All right. All right. After being a successful business owner in Carmel, Indiana for 30 years, he sold his business and started doing stand-up comedy professionally in 2002. He has performed on cruise ships, at retirement communities, high schools, holiday events, churches, fraternal lodges, and company Christmas parties. He comes to us directly from a successful escape from the Grant County Jail. Here he is, the funny man himself, Jack Barron. Thank you.
Well, hello.
Hello.
Wow, what a good-looking group. You know, 17 days ago, was in the hospital getting a laminectomy.
And we're going to get some bugs here.
My spine, we got a problem? Can't hear me, okay. That's not good.
Just gotta heat that there.
Does it work
Keep it
now?
as close as possible.
Or close it. Can you hear me now? There we go. Okay, 17 days ago, I was in the hospital getting a laminectomy on my spine to relieve pain from sciatic nerves. Today, thank God, I'm pain-free. And I saw a nurse and a doctor pushing a gurney down the hallway to the operating room. And the nurse said, "Don't be afraid." Says, "You'll do fine." Says, "It's not that difficult." So I asked her, I said, "Were you talking to the patient?" She said, "No, I was talking to the doctor." You know, when the doctor opened up my back, he discovered that my wife had taken my backbone when we got married. Some of you are probably thinking that I'm overweight. Well, I'll have you know that I am the exact weight that a person should be that is 6'3" tall. So therefore, I'm not overweight, I'm under tall. You know, I was told that if I ate my vegetables, I could lose weight. And I'm now eating carrot cake, zucchini bread, pumpkin pie, all my vegetables. My idea of a balanced diet is a cookie in each hand. And I gave up desserts one time. It was the worst 20 minutes of my life. My original weight, some people think that I should go back to my original weight, but it's really not practical. You know, my original weight was 7 pounds and 3 ounces. It's hard to get back there. But I understand brain cells, they go, fat cells never go anywhere. Obesity is what the doctor asked me. He said, does obesity run in your family? I said, Doc, nobody runs in my family. You know, I think I found out what is really causing my weight gain. It's the fillings in my teeth. That refrigerator door with the magnets on it keeps drawing me right in. You know, the refrigerator, I have a sign on it, on the door. It says, "Thou shalt not weigh more than thy refrigerator." And also, when I go to get in the refrigerator, I always knock on the door, just in case if there's a salad dressing. Did you get that one? You know, I was on a low-fat diet, and it was really working. My fat hanging lower than ever. But I went to the doctor, and they said that you're supposed to wear some loose-fitting clothes. If I had loose-fitting clothes, I wouldn't have signed up to go in to lose weight to begin with. That there is an exercise daily. If you do that, you die healthier. But there is dangers of overeating. I read that somewhere not too long ago, and that was telling me the dangers of overeating. And I said, that's it. That's all. After today, no more reading. But you know, I think the shampoo probably is what's causing my weight gain. Because whenever I get in the shower, I put that shampoo on my hair, and it goes all the way down my body. And you know, it says right there on the label, it says, full volume and big body. And that's it. But I have switched. I'm now using Dawn dish soap. It says right on the label, cuts fat. You know, I was doing real well on a diet, and I was driving down the road, and I came across one of these Krispy Kreme donut shops. You know, the one with the light flashing, it says hot. You know, I thought to myself, that could be God's way of rewarding me for being good on my diet. But I didn't want to take any chances. So I made a pact with God. I said, God, if you want me to have donuts, you let there be a parking space right there in front of the door. And you're not going to believe this. Fifth time around the block, parking space right there in front of the door. I was over at Kroger the other day, and I was buying some Purina dog chow for my award-winning dog. And the lady behind me, she says, do you have a dog? And I thought, what a stupid question that is when I'm buying Purina dog chow. And I said, no, ma'am, I don't have a dog. I'm just eating this Purina dog chow as a diet because it has a lot of minerals and vitamins in it. But the last time that I did that, I wound up in the hospital. She said, did the Purina dog chow make you sick? I said, no, ma'am. I said, while I was on the way home, I stopped to pee on a hydrant and I got hit by a car. You know, there's a government study out that says it found that people, women particularly, I see a lot of women in here, women that carry a few extra pounds live longer than men who mention it. My hometown, they had a problem with rats. And they couldn't get rid of them. They had them in the town hall, they had them over at the library. And the Baptist church, however, figured out how to get rid of them. What they do, they'd catch them, they'd get them saved, they'd baptize them, make them members of the church, and then they wouldn't see them again until Christmas and Easter. Pastor Simpson at the Church of God that we attended, he got a phone call from the IRS, Internal Revenue Service. He said, do you know Walter Thompson? He said, yes. He's a member of our church, of your church? And he says, yes. He said, did he donate $10,000 to your church this past year? And the pastor said he will. On Sunday, one Sunday, pastor asked everybody that wanted prayer to come forward. So Albert Oaks got up, and whenever the pastor asked him what he wanted him to pray for, he said, I want you to pray for my hearing. So the pastor put his fingers in his ears and he prayed up a storm. When he got through praying, he said, how's your hearing now? He says, I don't know, it's not scheduled till Wednesday. Old Lady Price played the organ at our church, and Pastor Simpson went to her home, and she invited him into the parlor and said, you can sit here and I'll go fix us some tea. Well, while Pastor Simpson was sitting there in the parlor, he got to looking around, and she had an organ, and she noticed sitting on the organ was a box of condoms. And he wondered, my goodness, why in the world would she have that? And she came back in, and he asked her about it. And she said, oh, those are the most wonderful things. Said, it says right on the instructions, put on the organ and will prevent disease. She says, I haven't had the flu all winter. Blanche Oaks made the best looking pies. She came on those potluck suppers nights, and I asked her, I said, Blanche, how do you make those pies so pretty? She said, oh, I can't tell you. I said, that's a secret. I said, well, you can tell me, I won't tell anybody. So she said, well, what I do is I put the pie pan, and then I put the dough in the pie pan, and then I trim it real even all the way around, and then she says, I put the fruit filling in the pie pan on top of that dough. And then she said, I put another layer of dough on top of that. And then I trim it real even all the way around. And then she says, I take my false teeth and crimp it all the way around. It makes a real pretty pie. Hazel Killenwood was an old maid at our church. And she left specific instructions about her burial, about her funeral. She said, I don't want any male pallbearers. She said, they wouldn't take me out when I was alive, they're not going to take me out when I'm dead. Tony Rosa spent some time in prison, and he came to our church and joined the church. Did pretty good until finally he died. And his brother up in Chicago came down, talked to Pastor Simpson about making arrangements for his funeral. And he told Pastor Simpson, he said, I will donate $20,000 to the church if you will tell the people that my brother was a saint. Well, you know, the people really were surprised as the pastor accepted the offer. And during the funeral, he said, Charlie was a bad dude, but compared to his brother, he was a saint. Little Fox Cemetery was located out behind our church, and I used to go over there and read some of the inscriptions that were on the tombstones. And I noticed one that said, pause, stranger, as you pass by, for such as you are now, so once was I. But as I am now, you soon shall be. So prepare for death and follow me. And somebody scribbled down on the bottom of the tombstone, to follow you, I'll not be content until I know which way you went. During Halloween, as a boy, to show how brave I was, I walked by the cemetery. And as I was walking by, I heard something behind me go, bop, bop, bop. And I looked back, and a casket had come out of the cemetery and was following me. So I started running, and I heard behind me, bop, 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 bop. I got home, and I ran up the stairs, and I heard behind me, boppity, 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 bop. and I got into the bathroom and I grabbed a hold of the first thing I could get my hands on, and it was a bottle of cough syrup, and I threw it at it, and you know what it did? It stopped the coughing. One day I knelt down and I saw a man who was kneeling down in front of a tombstone, and he was just crying his eyes out. He was saying, "Why did you have to die? Why did you have to die?" And I went up to him and I said, "Was it your wife?" He said, "No." "Why did you have to die? Why did you have to die?" I said, "Well, was it one of your children?" He said, "No." "Why did you have to die? Why did you have to die?" I said, "Well, was it one of your parents?" He said, "No." "Why did you have to die?" I said, "Well, who was it?" He said, "It was my wife's first husband." I said, "Why did you have to die?" You know, I bought my mother-in-law a burial plot out at the cemetery for Christmas. And the next year, I didn't buy her anything. She said, "Why not?" I said, "You didn't use what I bought you last year." We had a lot of kids in our church. Bobby asked the pastor, and he caught him out in the lobby, said, "What's that plaque upon the wall?" And the pastor said, "Son, that's to commemorate those that died in the service." And little Johnny said, "First service or second service?" Johnny was sick one Sunday, and his mother, he told him, said, "If you feel like you're gonna vomit," said, "don't you dare do it in church." Said, "If you feel like you're gonna vomit, you go outside and you vomit in the church yard." And so the service got started, and pretty soon Johnny said, "Mommy, I think I'm gonna vomit." She said, "Well, get going." So he jumped up and went down the aisle and went out the door, and he's gone for a little while. Pretty soon he comes back, sits down beside his mother. She said, "Well, did you make it outside?" He said, "I didn't have to." He said, "Out there in the lobby, they got this box that says for the sick." Billy's mother asked him what he learned in Sunday school. He said he learned that God's first name is Andy. Andy? Yes. Andy walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me. First name's Andy. Pastor Simpson prayed, "Oh God, if it were not for you, we would all be but dust." Little Johnny poked his mother and said, "Mommy, what's butt dust?" 3 little boys were bragging about their father and what he did. And the one said, "My dad can write a few words, they call it a poem, and they give him $25 for it." The other little boy said, "Well, my dad can write a few words, and they call it a song, and they give him $50 for it." And the third little boy said, "Well, I got all of you beat." So my dad writes a few words, and they call it a sermon. And he said it takes 3 ushers to take up the money. You know, there was a mother went into the bedroom to get her son up to go to church. And he said, "I don't want to go. I got 2 good reasons for not going." He said, "Number 1, I don't like those people. And number 2, those people don't like me." She said, "Well, I got 2 good reasons you should go." He said, "Number 1, you're 39 years old. And number 2, you're the pastor." We had a drought one summer, and it was so bad that the churches didn't have enough water to baptize. The Baptists were sprinkling, the Methodists were using wet wipes, the Presbyterians were giving rain checks, and the Catholics were praying that the wine turned back to water. Oh, it was bad. It was very bad. Marcia and Bill, they had an argument over who should make the coffee in the morning. And Marcia said, "The Bible says that the man is supposed to make the coffee." And Bill said, "I don't believe that." Well, she said, "I'll show you," and she went and got the Bible. She opened it up and she pointed to it and he says right there, Hebrews. I found a lot of humor in a lot of places, even in the Bible. For instance, Adam and Eve. The story about Adam and Eve you all know. Adam was lonely. God came along, said, how are things? And he told him, I'm lonely. God, of course, put him to sleep, took one of his ribs, made Eve. God came through the garden a few days later, said, how's things now, Adam? Oh, wonderful. He said, I thank you for making that helpmate for me. But he said, God, I do have one question. He said, what's a headache? Eve was jealous of Adam. She thought he was cheating on her. Adam said, that's impossible. We're the only two created beings. But she wasn't convinced. So that night when they went to bed, she scooted up behind him and reached over and counted his ribs. Noah, you remember, had the ark. Whenever that the ark landed, God told Noah to tell all the animals to go out and leave and multiply and replenish the earth. And Noah thought that they all did. Until about a month later, he was down at the bottom of the ark and he saw a couple of snakes down there. And he said, how come you guys aren't out multiplying? They said, we can't, we're adders. Did you know that on the day of Pentecost, all those disciples got there in the upper room in a Honda? Yeah, that's what it says, they were in one accord. Pastor Simpson had his teeth pulled, and his gums hurt so bad the first Sunday he was back to church, he only preached about 10, 15 minutes and sit down. The next Sunday he felt a whole lot better, so he preached about 25 minutes or so and sat down. The third Sunday, he got up and preached an hour and a half. And people said, why? He said, well, I'm ashamed to tell you. He said, I'm embarrassed about it. He said, this morning when I was getting ready for church, said I accidentally got my wife's false teeth in. Did you get that one? Women didn't like it. You know, there's Protestants do not recognize the Pope as the head of the church. And Jews do not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. And the Baptists do not recognize each other in a liquor store. My hometown didn't have very many Catholics. Do we have any Catholics here? Not here either. Okay. Well, you know, most of my neighborhood outside of town called Cherrydale was populated with Catholics except for one man, one house, and he was the only Protestant out there. And whenever Lent came around, he would get out there on his grill behind his house and put a big beefsteak on there, and that aroma just wafted through the neighborhood and drove those Catholics crazy. And they went to the priest and they said, can't you do something about this guy? I said, try to get him converted so we don't have to put up with this. So indeed, the priest got with him and they took him through catechism, and the priest got him up in the church and got the holy water out and sprinkled him and said, he was born a Baptist, he was raised a Baptist, and he was now a Catholic. And all those Catholics breathed a sigh of relief and thought, we won't have no problem with them. But next Friday came around, there he was with a big beefsteak out on the grill again. And they said, he can't do that. So they called up the priest and said, go over and talk to him, tell him the rules that he can't eat meat on Friday. And so the priest got in the car and drove over there. When he gets over to his house, he gets out of the car and walks around the house, and he sees the guy standing out behind the house over top of his grill, and he's got water and he's sprinkling the steak. And he says, he was born a cow, he was raised a cow, and he is now fish. Marion was a home care nurse. She was a nun that went around visiting the sick. She was making her rounds one day and she ran out of gas. And it wasn't very far to the gas station, so she went over there and asked if she could borrow a gas can and some gas to put in her car. And the station manager told her, said, "I'm sorry, sister," said, "our owner gas can is out right now, but it should be back soon. So if you want to wait for it," said, "Oh, I can't wait," said, "I've got patients I've got to visit." So she went back to her car and opened up the trunk and looked around and found a bedpan. And she took the bedpan back over to the service station and got it full of gas. She went back to her car. She's standing there pouring the gas into her car. A couple of Baptist guys over on the curb were watching her. One said to the other, said, "If that car starts, I'm going to become a Catholic." You know what they call a nun that walks in her sleep? That's a Roman Catholic. Speaking of nuns, I asked about we had any Catholics, didn't have any. Well, I was going to have you to tell Mary hello because we Protestants aren't allowed to talk to her. You know, the Baptist preacher called up Pastor Simpson and asked him if he would go pitch hit for them, and he had a scheduled conflict and needed him to go over to do a graveside service out at the cemetery, and it's out behind that little church, and it's supposed to be at 2 p.m. And so Pastor Simpson, he was headed over there, and he got lost out there in the country roads, and he got there late, and there wasn't anybody around, but he could see a hole in the ground over there, and he knew he had promised what he was going to do. So he went over there and opened up his Bible and read a few scriptures and prayed, closed up his Bible, went back and got in his car and drove off. A couple of guys standing over there, one said to the other, "You know, those are the prettiest words I think I've ever heard over a septic tank hole." One friend of mine was on vacation, visited church, and they settled down into a pew, and a fella came along and said, "That pew is saved." And our friend looked up at him and said, "So are we." You know, there is a prayer that I pray that says, "Lord, so far today, I've done well. I haven't gossiped. I haven't lost my temper. I haven't been greedy or grumpy, nasty or selfish or indulgent. And I'm very thankful for that. However, Lord, in a few minutes, I'm going to get out of bed, and from then on, I'm probably going to need a lot more of your help." You know, my wife and I will be celebrating our 61st birthday anniversary back on March the 27th. And you know, when I first met her, I knew she was Miss Right. I just didn't know her first name was always. But I asked her where she wanted to go for her anniversary. She said somewhere where she hadn't been in a long time. I suggested the kitchen. When we first met, she said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Indiana." She said, "What part?" I said, "All of me." You know, I was told by her dad when we got married, he said, "Son, let me give you some advice." He said, "You can either be happy or you can be right." And I have been happy for 61 years. I asked my wife, I said, "Am I happy?" "Oh yeah, you're happy." You know, I had a very romantic proposal. I got down on one knee and I said, "Put your clothes in my closet. Put your socks in my drawer. Lay your head on my pillow, but please don't snore." Oh, it was very romantic. Very romantic. You know, I knew as early as my wedding day that what kind of a marriage I was going to have. Because we got up there in front of the preacher and he said, "Do you take this man to be your husband?" And she said, "I do." He looked over at me and said, "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" And she said, "He does." Soon after we were married, my wife and she told me, she said, "I have great news for you. Pretty soon we're going to be 3 in this house instead of 2. Well, I started glowing with pride. I kissed her and I said, "Oh, you're making me the happiest man in the world." She said, "Well, I'm glad that you feel that way because my mother will be moving in with us tomorrow." You know, marriage is when a man and a woman become one. The problem becomes figuring out which one. My wife has very expensive taste. I asked her what she wanted for her birthday. She said something with a lot of diamonds in it. So I bought her a deck of cards. That's a lot of diamonds in it. You know, we hold hands everywhere we go. If I let go, she goes shopping. I came home the other day, I found a receipt for a dress that she had paid $300 for. I said, "Honey, why did you pay $300 for a dress?" She said, "The devil made me do it." He said, "I look good in that dress." I said, "Well, don't you know you're supposed to say, 'Get down behind me, Satan'?" She said, "I did." He said, "It looked good back there, too." We were down at the mall and we wound up in Macy's over in the baby suit department. Now, she hadn't bought a baby suit in 10 years and 20 pounds. But she came out with 2 of them. And she held them up and she had a all-in-one and a bikini. And she said, "Which one of these should I buy?" I said, "Honey, I think you need to buy the bikini because I don't think you can get it all in one." She had her credit card stolen. I didn't even bother to report it. The guy that got it, he was spending less money than she did. She has a mood ring. You ever hear of a mood ring? If you're in a good mood, it's blue. And whenever you're in a bad mood, it makes a red mark right here on my forehead. We don't have arguments, we just have very intense discussions. I admit that our last fight was my fault. My wife came home and she was complaining about having to do self-checkout. And she was complaining about the cashier being an idiot. I said, "Well, did you go through the self-checkout lane?" And she asked, I was watching in the living room the television, and she said, "What's on TV?" I said, "Dust." Well, after that, I didn't see her for 3 days or so, and then I could see her just a little bit out of this left eye. We had to go to marriage counseling after that. She gets up there and tells the marriage counselor, "I don't think I'm getting enough affection." Well, he jumps up, comes around the desk, grabs a hold of her, gives her a great big bear hug and a big smoochy kiss. He turns around to me and said, "Did you see that?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, she needs that at least 2 times a week." I said, "Well, I'll try to bring her on Tuesday and Thursday." You know, I put my contact lens in a glass of water and put them in the bathroom. She went in there, take some pills, drank it. For 3 days, she had 20/20 hindsight. Last year for her birthday, I took her out to an apple orchard. We stood there and watched the apples for about 20 minutes, but apparently it wasn't the kind of apple watch that she wanted. And you old folks may not know what an Apple Watch is, but that's a wristwatch. Anyhow, she told me that she wanted to cook Thanksgiving dinner in peace and quiet. So I took the batteries out of the smoke alarm. We do go out to a nice restaurant though, 2 times a week. I go on Monday and she goes on Friday. When she was pregnant with our first child, we went to a birthing class. And the fellow said, "You should know everything you possibly can about your spouse." For example, what's your spouse's what's your spouse's favorite flower? I looked over at my wife and I said, it's gold medal all-purpose flour, isn't it? My wife is always late. Her ancestors came over on the June flower. She doesn't know much about sports. She thinks that a Super Bowl is a toilet that cleans itself. In fact, when I took her to the first football game, and after the game I said, well, what do you think about that? She said, that's the silliest thing I've ever seen. She said in the beginning they get out in the middle of the field and they flip up a quarter, and then they start fighting over it. And they fight down to this end of the field, and then they fight down that end of the field. Everybody up in the stands are all hollering, get the quarterback, get the quarterback. My son asked me, Dad, where do we come from? So I told him the story of creation, about God creating Adam and Eve, and we're all sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And he went off to his mother and said, Mom, said, where did we come from? Well, she told him the story of evolution. She said we all came from monkeys and apes. And he came back to me and said, what's the difference? I said, oh, son, I told you about my side of the family and she told you about hers. She spent 2 hours at a beauty shop. And that was just for an estimate. She never meets a stranger. She got a phone call the other day. She talked for over 30 minutes. She got off the phone. I said, who was it? She says, wrong number. I asked her, I said, honey, how can you be so beautiful and so stupid? She said, let me explain. I said, God made me beautiful so you'd want me, and made me stupid so I'd want you. Women always like that one. I see we have a lot of senior citizens here today. You know, that's just a fancy word for old people. And I used to not be able to tell jokes about old people, but I can now since I are one. I'll be 88 in October. I was asked how I felt about being old. I said, I don't feel anything till noon, it's time for my nap. But there's 3 signs that you're getting old. Number 1, loss of memory. Number 2, I don't remember. But being old does have its advantages. I have people get up all the time and give me their seat. And that's okay on a bus, but it gets a little crazy in the men's room. A friend asked me if I wanted to participate in the Adopt a Grandparent program. Well, I thought I was going to be adopted, but now I'm stuck with a 95-year-old man to take care of. I went to an antique store, they didn't want to let me leave. But I've decided I'm not really old. I'm 25 plus shipping and handling. But I do look every morning to the newspaper to see the obituaries. And if my name is not there, I know it's going to be a good day. Amen. But did you ever notice that people are dying in alphabetical order? I thought that was strange. But there's 2 very famous people died this past year. One was David Brown. He was the inventor of that remote control, television remote control. And at his request, he was buried between 2 large sofa pillows. And then there was John Horowitz. He wrote that famous song, The Hokey Pokey. And everything went fine when he was getting ready for a funeral until they tried to put him in his casket. And they put his right leg in, he put his right leg out, put his left leg in. You know, this winter, we go down to Florida, we're known as snowbirds. You know what snowbirds are. But you know what winter frogs are. Winter frogs are when people go to Florida to croak. There was this old man upstairs on his deathbed, and he smelled aroma coming up the stairs of chocolate chip cookies. And he thought to himself, you know, that's my favorite food. And that must be my wife's last thing to do to show her love for me is to make a batch of chocolate chip cookies. So he crawled carefully out of bed, went over and started crawling down the stairs. When he gets down towards the bottom, he looks over, and on the dining room table is spread chocolate chip cookies all across the table. Well, he makes his way up to the table and reaches up with a trembling hand and whacked right across his wrist with a spatula. And his wife said, leave those alone. Those are for the funeral. You know, there was an old codger who went to the doctor for his physical. The doctor asked him, how's your bowel movements? He said, oh, regular as clockwork. He said, every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. He said, you can set your clock by. Doctor said, well, that's good. The old codger said, no, it's not. He said, I don't wake up till 8. You know, whenever I was young, I really wanted a BMW. But now that I'm old, I don't care that much about the W. As a young fellow with a digital iPhone asked me, he said, do you tweet? I said, no, but I toot sometimes. You know, he asked me, he said, on this social network, said, how could I follow you on social media? I said, you can follow me on the bulletin board over at Kroger. You know, I'm enjoying my retirement. My wife asked me, said, what are you going to do today, honey? And I said, nothing. She said, that's what you did yesterday. I said, yeah, I know, but I didn't get finished. You know, I appreciate Campbell soup. They now make a soup for old people. It's alphabet soup with large letters. My hometown was a small town down south of Terre, about 21 miles, called Shelburne. And that town was so small, we didn't even have a village idiot. We had to take turns. They didn't have a traffic signal. The town council voted to put one in, but we never did get one. They couldn't agree on what color to make the lights. We had a whole bunch of old people in my hometown. Sam and Charlie were two old geezers that were out at Walmart. They were pushing their shopping carts and ran into each other. And one said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, I was looking for my wife. And the other one said, well, I was looking for mine too. He said, what's your wife look like? I said, well, she's 27 years old. She's red hair. She's got blue eyes. She's wearing short shorts. He said, what does your wife look like? He said, oh, never mind, let's go look for your wife. Janice Turley, she fixed up her 80-year-old grandmother on a blind date with a 95-year-old guy. She came home from the date and she was all shook up. She was beside herself. And her granddaughter said, well, what happened, Grandma? She said, I had to slap him 3 times. She said, well, why? Did he get fresh? She said, no, I thought he was dead. Sam Jones lived out on Shady Rest Nursing Home. He was sitting out on the porch one day watching traffic go by, and a farmer went by with a tractor pulling the wagon. And he said, howdy. And the farmer said, well, howdy. He said, what's in the wagon? He said, manure. He said, what are you going to do with it? He said, I'm going to put it on my strawberries. He said, why don't you come by here for supper? He said, they put whipped cream on here. You know, 80-year-old Lily Parker was interviewed by the local newspaper because they thought it was newsworthy that she, on the eve of her 4th time she was getting married. So the reporter asked her, said, well, what were the occupations of your first husbands? She said, well, when I was 20 years old, I married a banker. She said, when I was 40 years old, I married a circus ringmaster. And when I was 60 years old, I married a preacher. And now that I'm 80 years old, I'm going to marry an undertaker. It is 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready, 4 to go. Tom Asbury asked his grandfather, said, "What's your secret of long life?" He said, "Son, what you do is you take a pinch of gunpowder and you put it in your oatmeal every morning." And he did that faithfully. And he lived to be 105 years old. And when he died, he left 5 children, 10 grandchildren, and 15 great-grandchildren, and a 25-foot hole in the ground where the crematorium used to be. It was full of gunpowder. Henry Taylor was an 80-year-old man, and he was walking down the street with his friend, and they looked down and there was a frog. And the frog said, pick me up, and I'll become a beautiful bride for you." And John picked him up, and he said, kiss me, and I'll become a beautiful bride for you." And instead of that, he stuck him in his pocket. His friend said, "Well, how come I didn't kiss him?" He said, "At my age, I'd rather have a talking frog." Earl and Edna went to the state fair every year, and they had airplane rides over there, but they charged $55. And Edna said, $55 is too much, we can't go. And Earl said, "I'm 85 years old, if I don't go now, I may never get to go." Well, the pilot overheard him talking. And he said, "I'll tell you what, folks, I'll make you a deal." He said, "I'll take you up for a ride, and neither one of you say one word, not a sound out of either one of you. It'll be free." And he said, "Well, free's good, let's go." So they got on the plane, up they went. As soon as they get up there, he starts doing barrel rolls and figure eights, and around and around he went. Pretty soon he landed. He said, "You folks really surprised me." So I thought, sure, when I did all those acrobat moves, somebody would have said something. Ed said about almost did when Edna fell out, but $55 is $55. Wilbur Hartman and Roscoe Kirby had farms just outside of town, and Roscoe went over and told him, said, "I've got rats in my barn, and I don't know what to do to get rid of them." He said, "Well, what you do is you go buy a boa constrictor snake, and you lay it down on the floor in the barn, and said it will swallow those snakes whole." So he went and bought a boa constrictor snake, brought it in there and laid it down on the floor of the barn, and it curled up and went to sleep, and rats ran all over him. So he called up his friend and said, "Hey, this isn't working." So those rats ran all over that snake. So what can I do? He said, "Well, what you do is you go down to the drugstore and you buy some Viagra and you feed it to that snake." He said, "Viagra, what good did that do?" He said, "Well, I saw on television that it's good for erectile dysfunction." Ed Schroeder had a hearing problem. And he went to the doctor and he prescribed hearing aids and said, "Come back in 2 weeks, see how they're working." He came back and said, "Well, how's the hearing aids working?" And he said, "Fine." He said, "I can hear a pin drop." He said, "Well, what does your family think about it?" I said, "Oh, I haven't told them yet." He said, "I sit around and listen to them talk about me, so I've changed my will 3 times. And then there was an old snake that was hard to see. He was almost blind. And he went to the doctor and they prescribed eyeglasses and told him to come back 2 weeks, see how they were working. He came back in 2 weeks and the doctor said, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm depressed." I said, "Well, how come?" I said, "Aren't your glasses working?" I mean, yes, they're working too good." He said, "How's that?" I said, "Oh, I found out I've been married to a water hose for 2 years." There was this fellow that had troubles with finances and also with his marriage. So to solve his problem, he went out looking for somebody to kill his wife and collect off the insurance. And he found this guy by the name of Artie. And Artie agreed to do the dastardly deed for $25,000. And so they agreed to do it, and he said, "But I've got to have the money up front." Well, the husband said, "No, I can't do that. I've got to collect off the insurance first before I can pay you. But I got to have something up front." So, begrudgingly, he pushed his hand down his pocket, pulled out a dollar bill, and gave it to Artie. Artie rolled his eyes and said, well, okay. So the next day over at Kroger, they were in the produce department. And Artie saw the wife. And he went over to her and he put his hands around her neck and he choked her to death. And the produce manager saw him. And he didn't want to leave any witnesses. So he went over to the produce manager and put the hands around his neck and choked him to death. Well, they had security cameras all over the place, and it wasn't very long till the police had him in custody. And while they were interrogating him, he confessed that he had been paid $1 to kill these two people. Well, the next day, the headline in the newspaper read, "Artichokes, 2 for $1 at Kroger." Well, folks, you've been a good audience. And I want you to be happy and many more years of life. God bless you.